Alrighty. So, welcome to the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riders from the inside out. I am Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer for Wexford Training and developer of the program Training for Optimal Balance. And with me is the brilliant Deb Romero, orthopedic massage therapist, certified Alexander Technique instructor, and the founder of her business, Optimal Posture. So today's topic is a continuation from the last podcast. Last one was podcast 5. I think this is 6. Or no, last one was 4.
I think we're 7. I think.
I should. And we're off with a bang, right? Okay. Oh no, this is number 6. I did write
it. Number 6? Oh,
this
good.
Number 6. And so number 5, we started with the topic stability in motion. And it's a big topic. So we decided to continue it this week with stability in motion part 2, or continued, or whatever you want to call it. So that is the topic of today. And Deb and I sort of did a little debrief after the last podcast because it's such a big topic, and it's one that is not often talked about in the horse world, like the importance of stability and how we find stability while we're in motion, dealing with our internal forces of motion as well as the external forces of motion that are coming into our body from the horse as a rider. So what we're going to talk about today, specifically kind of carrying on, we won't spend too much time going back over the axial skeleton, but that's important to understand from the last podcast. But we're going to talk about that sort of constant back and forth of information we get when we're learning to ride. We have instructors who say, move with the horse, and other people will say, sit quietly, keep your legs still, keep your hands still, don't move. So we get it from both directions, and we touched on it a little bit in the last podcast. So we're going to cover that more today. And that segues into what it feels like to ride really well is not at all what it looks like. It's sort of an optical illusion. So if you haven't experienced how to find that coordination of getting your stability while on a horse, then trying to mimic what you see other people do often doesn't work very well, because what it looks like and what it feels like are two different things. And all of this is important to talk about. I think the main focus this podcast is really a bit more on the rider, not as much on the horse. But the importance of the rider's stability is paramount, because the way we help the horse stabilize their bodies, particularly the axial skeleton, which is what we straddle when we sit in the saddle, is we straddle their spine, we control their head and neck with the reins. And so the most efficient and powerful way to help a horse find stability in motion with a rider is to be a stable rider. So learning to find your stability as a rider helps the horse stabilize their thoracolumbar spine, their cervical spine, that long neck and heavy head that has to sort of work with their torso and forelegs. And then, also kind of how we all go into instinct. We all do the same freaking things on the back of a horse. We all do it. And to learn to ride well it takes a bit of time. And what started this whole podcast series in the first place was translating what people are telling you is difficult, because we tend to translate information in the point of reference of our own experience. So if we've never experienced what it feels like to actually balance well and feel very stable but soft on the back of a horse, then we're sort of taking these words that we're given and doing our best with it. So we're going to try to break down how the rider stabilizes this in this part 2, a little more than what we talked about with the horse. So, Deb, let's start with how do we stabilize while we're riding? And what does that mean? And what, like, when you hear move with the horse, how did you interpret that? Or when you heard keep your hands still, how did you interpret that?
You mean in the beginning when I was first starting to ride? Yeah. I always I think most people do. They translate it into some sort of stiffening or shortening. So keeping your arms still, when somebody would say that, it's like, oh, well, lock them down next to me. That's still.
Right.
But it's not still.
Right. Because like we talked about on a boat, if you stiffen everything when you're standing on a sailboat, not the big ocean liners, but like a sailboat or something, if you're standing and you stiffen and try to be still with all your muscles, you get pitched around all over the place. You're very unstable.
Right. So what we tend to do is shorten and close our joints, which allows for no adaptability. And then some other part is going to take that, whether it's the nodding ponytail
Yeah.
or the bounce, it's going to go somewhere. So if you're stiffening, it's going to show somewhere else. And that's what I think I see when I look at a rider and you go, wow, they look like they're doing nothing.
Yeah.
When
And
those of us
is a specific coordination to look like you're doing nothing.
Exactly. And now that I've experienced that through years with you and years practicing the Alexander technique, I am like got sweat dripping down my face trying to maintain my own stability without stiffening or shortening any part of my body.
Right. Right. So the way it's best explained is very specific, and we touched on this in the last podcast. Our bones, which are, say, I don't want to go into Insegrity today, but you guys can Google it. You can look up what Insegrity is. And Insegrity is a structure that maintains its integrity or its shape through tension elements and compression elements. So our bones are like the compression elements. Our skeleton, and in particular our axial skeleton, in a vertical, stable alignment within internally, as well as in alignment with gravity in a vertical relationship, that is what allows all of our soft tissues to then change in tone and use to support the stability of the skeleton in motion. So separating, and it's a little trick you can do, everybody can do it in their mind, but nobody's ever asked us to think about, could we separate our bones from our soft tissue when we ride?
Yeah, or even what works for me, because that's a real hard concept for me to grasp, is, even going to my joints. Are my joints open and available? I'm always asking myself that when I ride, because if my joints aren't available in my arms, legs, hips, ankles, then that means I am tensing a muscle and locking that bone joint soft tissue system down to where I can't receive any information from my body or from the horse's body.
No, and that's also true. There's a lot of research that shows when we overly contract muscles, which is what we do for immediate stability. When we lose our balance, all the muscles contract excessively. Of course, we contract muscles all the time, but excessive muscular contraction actually fills your own nervous system and creates a loop of information. You can't receive the movement
Exactly.
force
Yep.
if you're really excessively tight through your muscles.
Yeah,
right?
because the proprioceptors that send the information are shut down. Because they've already been used, shall we say.
Right.
Yeah. So then no information is going to the brain about any possible change.
Right. And what you're talking about too, with your joints open and available, you're specifically referencing your appendicular skeleton, not your axial skeleton.
That's a great point. Great point. Yeah, because if you've got proper postural tone in your axial skeleton in your spine, then your joints can move, your appendicular. If you don't, if you, like I was taught, hunter jumper, grip with your thighs, and there, if I go to grip with my thighs, I've lost all integrity of my spine.
Right. And that's
So
part of the riding instruction. It also feeds on the human instinct to grip with the arms and legs, the
yes,
appendicular or appendages of the body, when the primary line, the axial skeleton, becomes unstable.
exactly.
And so a lot of the traditional way we're taught, we were all taught that way, the heels down, close your thighs in, keep your seat still, keep your hands still, look where you're going, shoulders back. All of that can sort of lock you into a position that does a couple of things. It actually makes your center line, your core, your skull, your spine, your pelvis, your core muscles work less when your appendages work more.
Yeah, and if you think about it, your appendages, these are what I call superficial muscles. They're movement muscles. They're not postural muscles. The postural muscles are deep, right against the spine, and they're short, so they move in a very specific short range of motion. Whereas, our arms, they can spatially move quite a bit, and so can our legs. Those
Right.
are superficial muscles. So balancing on the axial skeleton is the most important thing.
That's exactly how we're meant to adapt to find stability in motion. The stability part is the central line of the body, the skull, the spine, the pelvis, but the appendages are the adaptable part. So if we're locking our appendages and, like you said, closing the joint space in our arms and legs, then the axial skeleton, or the center of our body, will become very unstable.
Exactly.
So that's what we have to reverse. If we want soft legs that lay on the horse like wet towels or wet noodles, all these things we hear, we can only do that if we're not using our legs for our general stability. The general stability has to be the torso. Then then you have control over your arms for the proper rein contact, for giving rein resistance without leading to holding and pulling, or to use your legs properly. So stability has to be somewhere in the body. And if it's in the appendages, then you're going to lose control over the axial part of the body, the central part. If you focus on building the stability in your alignment of your skull, spine, and pelvis, all that excessive tension that we use in our arms and legs as riders, it just melts away.
Exactly. And I was playing with that. I was riding this morning, and a memory came back. There used to be a dance back in the 80s. I don't know if you remember it, called the dead bug. So, because I got this visual, I'm like, how can I explain to people what we're talking about? And the best way to do it is to lay on a flat surface on your back and keep your skeleton still and move your arms and legs. And they call that the dead bug dance. So I looked it up online, and there's actually YouTube stuff on a core exercise called the dead bug. I don't know.
All right. I somehow missed the dead
dead bug. Hey, maybe it was just where I was living at the time, but you may, that was a couple of the videos I watched on that today. They were pretty decent about visualizing what it would look like and possibly feel like for the human to stabilize the spine, but that was lying down. Once we go vertical, the brain's most important function is to maintain vertical. So maintaining it in space when on a moving object is extremely difficult for us to do.
Yes. Yeah. So what I ask people to do when they're riding is I go, can you just become aware of all the different muscle tone in your body, but think of yourself like a hollowing skeleton. Yourself as a hollowing skeleton is what you're trying to quiet on the horse.
I
Right.
like that. I don't think we think down to the bone level, thinking of skeleton instead of muscular effort, I
Right.
think is a great beginning.
And so you think of that muscle tone, whether it's connective tissue, fascia, tendon, ligament, or muscle, that is the adaptable part around the bones, just like our appendages are meant to be the adaptable part around our axial skeleton. So one of the things I have people do, and it occurred to me one day, this was like this huge epiphany. I was carrying a bowl of water out for the cats, and I was like, I filled it too full, and I was taking it outside from the kitchen, and I was like, oh, I went, maybe that water analogy, right? So last time I talked about the forces of the ocean and getting our sea legs is the most similar coordination to riding well, that quiet stability that we're looking for, but with softness. So another image we can play with is if we put a bowl of water in our core, what we do to walk across the kitchen and not spill or slosh that water out of the bowl, that's exactly what is the same coordination we need as riders. Because to balance the bowl, your skeleton in motion is stable, supporting that bowl of water so it's not sloshing around. But if you get too tense in your muscles, slosh, 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 you spill all over the place. But if you moved with the water like we're taught to do on a horse, that would be ridiculous. The water would go flying out
Everywhere.
of the head, right?
Everywhere.
So that coordination, and people can try it at home, just overfill a bowl, fill it right to the top of water and carry it across the kitchen. And you'll find you have to really relax a lot of muscles and think of stabilizing the bowl with the bones and allowing the muscles to adapt around that stability, holding the bowl of water. So then when you ride, I'll often tell people, I don't like thinking of the pelvis as a bowl because it's really not, but if you put a bowl somewhere in your middle behind your belly button, you'll feel the movement of the horse. If the horse is really out of balance, it'll slosh the rider's pelvis and spill that water all over the place. If we have a bad habit of being too far forward, we spill the bowl of water out the front of our body. If we have a habit of sitting too far back on our pockets, we spill that water, that bowl of water out the back. So the feeling of imagining you have a bowl of water in your core, and when you're on the horse, the way you find that combination of, yes, you move with the horse, so to speak, that's all your soft tissue and your appendage adaptations, but you also need to sit still and be quiet, which is you can think of as your bones, and particularly the skull, spine, pelvic bones being stable. And so the idea of finding stability in that balance between adaptability with your soft tissue and stability through your skeleton is like quieting the water. So even if the horse is trying to slosh your middle around a lot, we can organize our bodies to not spill the water despite the forces that are coming into our body from the horse. And that is how you help a horse find stability in their torso, in their back, in their axial skeleton. Because in order to make that bowl of water still and quiet and reduce the sloshing, what we have to do with our body is we're resisting the excessive movement and stiffness of the horse. So we're
I
getting,
think excessive is good. Excessive is, do we know what that feels like?
yeah, well, if I get on a horse and he's trying to slosh my bowl of water all over the place, I go, that is the definition of compensatory movement. That is not optimal use of the horse's axial skeleton. Because when the axial skeleton of the horse is straight and stable and moving towards flexion or lifting the back, they don't slosh the rider. It's
That's a good point. There's no sloshing. And I know you don't have very many hills in Florida, but here in Virginia, I don't have too much level land where I live. And I think maybe some people could feel what sloshing feels like as if they walk a horse downhill.
Yeah.
Because the excessive sloshing, you can tell if a horse is really out of balance, is if they slosh a lot and they will throw you. So,
Right.
and that's that excessiveness that when you ride, say, in an arena, it might be more subtle than that, but it still can be there.
And that's why if people interpret the words, because I'm not saying the words are wrong, but the way it's most often interpreted when we're told to move with the horse is we slosh our skeleton. We move our whole skeleton with the horse. And when we do that, we are weight and mass on the horse's back. So it's like if you put a kid in a backpack and he's wiggling all over the place, it makes your ability to balance and walk harder, not easier, right? Because that weight, that living weight and mass on the horse's back, if we're trying to move with the horse, it's for sure excessive. Because if we're trying to move our skeleton with the movement of the horse, then our body weight is going to create instability in the horse. So the moving with the horse part, quote unquote, is invisible.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. And I think the words you used are really important, like the word try. We often go way overboard on that.
Yeah.
Because we think it has to be done. It has to be a place, and it's not a place. It's got to be adaptable. And like you said before, soft and adaptable, and not the over try, not the stiffening.
Right. And that's what I liked about that image of putting a big bowl of water in your core or filling your pelvis with water, is because if you over effort, you slosh.
Yeah.
You have to really find the delicate balance between the mobility and adaptability of your soft tissues around a stable skeleton. And when we're trying, which we all do, we're learning, we're trying our best, we always tend to over effort, which works. It's over efforting is 100% counterproductive to stability. And
completely agree.
Stability is a requirement of a moving body.
Yes. And I know we've talked about this before, because you were talking about the pelvis. If we can get riders and people in the general public, especially when you get on a horse, connecting your pelvis with your torso so that your legs can just hang.
Yes.
Because I always had this image riding that my pelvis, that my torso stopped at my waist. And I think that's what I started locking my hip, because trainers would always say, can't you feel your sit bones on the horse? And I had such an arched low back, there was no way my sit bones were even close to the saddle. And I'm like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So connecting the pelvis to the torso and letting the legs hang, we've talked about that for a long time. And what happens when you put your foot in the stirrup can change everything too.
And I did the same thing. It was like my torso stopped where my pants started. If my pants started here, that must be the beginning of my legs, right? And
Right.
so that was, and I wasn't even fully conscious that that's how I was thinking of it, but that was exactly how I was thinking of it, was I went, well, that's where my pants start, so that's where my leg starts. But to really think all the way down to your seat bones, and if you can't feel your seat bones, then you can play with sort of moving the spine forward and back. And you might be surprised where you feel your seat bones.
Yeah, and another game I like to teach people is just to take their hands, put it in the crease of their pants, and bring that all the way out to your thigh. That's how far down your pelvis goes.
So the crease of your pants, like when you sit.
When you're sitting or going to sit, put your hands like this, the ridge, the outside ridge of your hand, in the crease of your pants. That's where you should bend from.
That's where the hip joint is.
Yes, and
Way
it's
down
much
there,
lower, way down there.
Yeah, where your pants fold up.
Yeah. So
Yes.
if we can start thinking conceptually, okay, it's that much torso. I have to manage.
Yes, that's the torso, from the head to the seat bones, back to the head. Yes.
Yeah. And look at how much the horse has. I mean, in comparison. So the more stable we are all the way to our sit bones, the more stable the horse is going to be.
So when you talk about, and I think we all recognize what we would call a beautiful rider, even the untrained eye. There's people who look like they're part of a horse, and there's people who look like a foreign object up on the So the people who, and really good riders make it look easy. There's kind of an effortlessness to it. There's an ease to it, which is true across the board. I used to just love to watch, I'm dating myself, Wayne Gretzky. I go, that guy was like amazing on ice. He was so fast and yet never looked like he was rushing. And then, you know, Michael Jordan, it's like he's another one. There was just this gracefulness when he played basketball. And the fact that he could levitate as high off the ground as he could was amazing. So when I see a really good rider, I call a really good rider someone who makes it look easy. They don't.
And that's a good word. And it's that sense of ease. And you can't, when you look at them, you can't say, oh, it's her, she's doing this or she's doing that, or he's doing this or doing that. You don't, it's so physiologically intrinsic that's going on. That body is thinking, you know, right through the spine to stabilize so that it doesn't look like you're doing anything.
Right, because all the work is much deeper towards the center of the body, but you feel the work. You feel it. Yeah. So to make it look quiet, like stability, but balanced with a softness, because some riders look very stable, but they look stiff.
They look like they're, I agree.
Look very soft, but almost so soft they're not stable. They're moving more than the horse, right? So to find that blend of softness and immobility, right? So it's the immobility that makes the rider look quiet. That's the skeleton I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
But you're working your ass off on the inside. I mean, constant little weight adjustments, core strength, that, you know, all the deeper muscles, all your Pilates muscles, all your yoga muscles, all of those muscles are working to support that quiet stability, and not working like they're gripping and holding. It's that constant adaptation. And I don't know if this is true. I've never researched it. Maybe somebody could leave a comment if they know on this video, but I stumbled across this observation that our sense of motion somehow is directly linked to changes in our soft tissue and our body weight. So what it feels like to adapt while you're on a moving force in order to keep your skeleton quiet and immobile, your brain thinks you're moving all the time. So that's where I understand the advice. A really talented rider feels like they're moving all the time, but they don't look like they're moving at all. Right? So I think our sense of motion is kind of linked to changes in muscle tone and weight shifts of our whole body. That's what makes our brain feel like we're moving. But so in our minds, we have to allow ourselves to move in order to find that coordination, just like carrying a bowl of water. If you try to keep the water still, it won't be still. Right?
Right.
If you feel like you're moving and adjusting a little bit constantly, you'll find that your hands are quiet and you can quietly carry the bowl of water. Right? But you feel like you're making all these minute little changes and adjustments while you're walking across the kitchen because you're in motion. So, what it feels like to our brains is because we're constantly shifting weight to keep our seat bones equal and level, and we're constantly changing our muscle tone, not only to stabilize ourselves, but maybe resist a problem the horse is having. That's what makes our brains think I'm moving all the time. But if you watch yourself on video, or if you watch a good rider, they don't look like they're moving at all. They make it look easy, like they're not even trying hard, but they're somehow softly and quietly immobile.
Well, I like that. Yeah.
Even the arms and legs look immobile, right? Other than if you're releasing over a jump or playing polo or whatever. But generally, especially the axial skeleton looks really immobile. So finding that blend of soft immobility is tricky. And we overdo it to, with our bones, with our muscles, all of that. But it's very important to understand that it's an optical illusion. When you see, and talented riders can't figure this out. If somebody's born with a talent for riding horses, they don't know what they're doing. So how
They can't express it. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, because they go, well, you just stay still. Or you just move with the horse.
I definitely was not born with it. That's for sure.
Yeah, me either. I had to learn it. And so it's such an interesting thing to realize that when you see what you call a beautiful rider, and I really believe the human eye recognizes good movement. It always looks quiet and soft, but stable and in control, just like those athletes I talked about.
And I think that's it's an internalness that happens, because you can never, like you said, you can't pick one thing that's going on. It's the level of organization.
Yeah.
That is magnificent. That's what the beauty of it is. When you see a really good rider, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And actually, by the time we get there, there's a lot of ways to build skills to get there. But once you're there, our body has an intelligence where we can adapt faster than the speed of thought. So as long as we're still thinking, I need to heels down, and you send the message and you push your heels down, and then it comes back up. Yep, my heels are down. As long as we're still in that thinking realm, we're way too slow. And so it always looks a little unnatural. But by the time we get the proper coordination, just like riding a bike or learning to swim, there comes a point where we don't really know what we're doing. It's become unconscious, because it's just, once we get the coordination, then our bodies respond faster than the speed of thought. It's much faster. So anything else? Let's see, what else were we going to talk about? Stabilizing on the horse. What it feels like is not what it looks like. And just, I did mention this already, but finding that use of our body is really important to all horses that carry a rider.
I completely agree. And because we've been working together at least 12 years, and my mare that was airs above the ground 12 years ago, I had a beautiful ride on her today, and FedEx trucks were going by, and I saw one ear kind of go to the FedEx truck, and I went, "Oh no, no, come back here."
Yeah.
And she went, "Oh yeah, this is much more important than the FedEx truck," speaking at the FedEx truck. So
Yeah, because
that's when you know you're getting somewhere.
it feels better.
Oh,
And
it
so
feels awesome.
horses I get in training, green horses, lameness rehab or behavioral issues, safety issues, I go, this is now how we have to go about things, is understand the mechanics. But one of the things that drives me crazy is people go, oh, I'm just a trail rider. I really don't need to know anything about balance. And I go, you kind of do, even if you're just a part-time pleasure rider, because you are weight and mass that is unnatural for any horse to carry. And if you don't manage your own weight and mass and stability, then you become detrimental to the horse's body. You become a problem for the horse. And that's sort of the genesis of lameness and behavioral issues, is just a horse struggling with a rider that's either too stiff and unstable or too loose and unstable, that they're constantly having to cope with.
And I think the key word is unstable.
Stability is huge. That's why we're doing this part two. And I go, have you ever played, like we had a swimming pool when I was growing up, and we used to play this game called chicken. And so the strong guys would be on the bottom and the small people would be up on the shoulders.
Us little short people.
Yes, I was always one on the shoulders, right? Because I was small enough. So when you get, and then you wrestle, you try to get the other person off of their person, right? In the swimming pool. I love that game. But it was so funny because if you had an unstable base, it was very hard as the person on top to try to get, not only get your own stability, but try to like wrestle this other person. But if the person on the bottom was stable and the person on top wasn't, like as soon as you started wrestling and you become unstable, the person on the bottom is really struggling.
Yep.
Really struggling. And they have to be quite strong to cope with the weight and mass of that person on their shoulders being unstable. And I go, that's a human experience of being a horse, the person carrying somebody on your shoulders, and being the rider, the person up on the shoulders. But that's where you really experience the physics of what I'm talking about. And it's a physical reality. You can't get away from the physics involved with placing a human on the back of a horse. So even if you're a part-time pleasure rider, learning how to sort of put that bowl of water in your core and learn to stabilize it it creates so much ease for the horse's work of carrying us. Right?
Yeah.
And that's true with walk, trot, canter.
Oh yeah, and connecting the pelvis to the whole upper body instead of to the legs. I think it's also, if you can think of that bowl and your legs just hanging off of it, that would be cool.
Yeah, so your appendages actually become appendages.
That's what they should be. Instead of glue sticks.
Yes, exactly. Instead of the Velcro wrappers. Yeah, and using, kind of going to our arms and legs. Part of it is the words we're all given as we learn to ride, but it is instinctual.
Oh, yes.
So it's instinctual. And like we talked about last time, as a rider, you're going to catch yourself over and over, pushing into the saddle, pushing into the stirrups, gripping with the legs, hanging onto the reins too long. And when you understand that the coordination of a good rider is half stability and half mobility. You just want the stability part to be in the bones, and in particular, the axial skeleton. So anytime you find your appendages, your arms or legs getting stiff, it can be really useful to transfer that energy rather than fight it, right? Because how many lessons have you taken where the instructor's going, don't pull, right? And you're like, I'm trying my best, don't pull, I'm trying, but to say, don't do something only adds fuel to what you're already doing.
I agree.
If you ignore the problem, but you take the same energy, the energy is useful. The energy you need in your body to be stable is just as much as you need to grip, right? But you can move that energy and direct it to your skull, spine, pelvis area. And then you're not fighting these arms that you feel are out of your own control, or your legs that are out of your own control. And so instead of saying, don't do something, even if we're taking lessons and we hear the instructor say, don't do that, in my mind, I go, oh, I just need to move that energy to where it should be, where it's more useful to me.
To me, it's like redirecting a 2-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
No, over here.
Push that little 2-year-old around.
Over here.
Yeah. But if you grab the 2-year-old, I love it when I'm in a store and these little kids throw themselves on the ground. Right? I go, that's my favorite.
That's my son. Oh, look at that. Good for you.
Yeah. Or when dogs do that, if they don't want to go for a walk, they just dead weight. And it makes a tiny living creature incredibly heavy. Incredibly heavy. Right? So if we do that on the back of a horse, we just like exaggerated our body weight on their back. If we collapse and do nothing and become hypermobile, it's kind of like that little kid in the store that throws himself on the ground and the mother can hardly drag this little body that's 10% of her body weight. Or it's just like watching little kids too, or animals when they don't want to do something and they brace and stiffen every muscle in their body. Mm-hmm. and go in an opposing direction of force, right? So
it just becomes a tug of war at that point, and I've seen that with riders and horses too. You have.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how we don't actually change our physical body weight, right? So let's do it politely. If we weigh 100 pounds, we don't weigh more or less than 100 pounds, but the force impact we can have on the horse by how we use our body can be upwards of 3 times our actual body weight. We can feel like a 300-pound person to a horse. Or
yeah, there's a saying in the Alexander community, it's not how much weight you carry, it's how you carry your weight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that is the primary reason horses struggle, that lead to poor performance, safety issues, lameness issues, behavioral issues. So much of it is directly linked back to their ability to feel stable in motion with a rider. And if they don't, just like us, when we become unstable, that, that sympathetic nervous system kicks in.
Exactly.
And the body, even before we can think about it, the body is going to do what it needs to do, like you said, to remain vertical,
exactly.
To try not to topple over. So I think that kind of covers everything we wanted to talk about. Was there, like, how do we stabilize the balance between move with the horse and be still? And I'm telling you, carrying that bowl of water was an epiphany. I go, that's how you do it. Sea legs are another way to do it. And I use surfer references all the time.
Yeah, I do too.
Because if you look at a really good surfer, and some of them are shredders, they're fast and furious, and others are longboarders and they're sort of graceful and stylish. But if you think of the forces that are involved in even a small ocean wave, that's a ton of force.
So, just if you think about it down to the bones, their ankle bones are moving, their knee bones are moving, their hips are moving. All of that is moving. So the axial skeleton can stay still.
Yes. Yeah, I think joints are part of the adaptability part of the body, open and
I
available.
like that. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because technically joints are bones, but for what we're talking about, joints would be in the category of the soft tissue adapting to the motion.
They're adaptable.
Motion. But I go, when you look at a surfer, that's way more force than a horse. And there's no saddle horn or stirrups or reins to hang on to.
Or stop.
Right. I go, you're going, you're there. The ocean isn't stopping. You're either going to get pounded or you're going to duck under the water and start over. But if you go off your board, which is why they wear a leash, so they don't lose the board, right? Because you're going to go off at some point. But they don't blame the surfboard and they don't blame the ocean. But we can blame the horse rather than just thinking of the horse as a force of nature. It's a force of motion. We have to learn to surf that force of motion. And surfers, there's nothing they're hanging on to. It's all balance in the context of working with a tremendous amount of force. You take a 6-foot ocean wave, that is a massive amount of force. And yet we can ride it and make it look easy. Right? Not that I can surf, but I'm like,
not me.
Yeah. And so those are the kind of images. If we look at the horse, rather than working against us, it's not personal. The horse is not personal. They do what they do because they're a horse. They're a large, powerful force of nature in motion. That's a lot of force that we have to learn how to cope with and how to ride, like how to work with it rather than trying to box it in and
containerize it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree.
Any other points you want to?
That sounds great.
Cover? Anything you want to add?
Nope.
Okay. I feel more thorough on our topic of stability and motion. Yeah. I don't think we need a part 3. I feel like we kind of covered everything I wanted to talk about. And so we will pick up again next week with a new topic.
Sounds good.
So if you guys like the podcast, Horse Geeks Podcast, you can click subscribe so you are alerted when we put out new ones. Please like and share. Helps us out.
Oh, please do some comments, questions, comments.
If you guys who are listening to these podcasts, if you have questions or if there's a topic you would like to hear talked about, please do comment under the video. And we read all the comments, open to suggestions, happy to take questions and sort of go from there. And if we don't know, we're going to tell you we don't know.
Exactly.
But we'll also try to figure out where to find the answers. So yeah, subscribe, like, share, comment. We'd love to hear back from you. All right. Thank you. And we'll see ya, you big horse geek.
Yep. Be kind, everybody.
All right. Bye.